So, Fred, I've been talking to a lot of people about how the poor and hardworking people, they're often at an economic disadvantage. They often have to pay a lot more for their electricity bills, their shopping. There's many structural disadvantages in the economy. But I think the thing you found so interesting, you found out early in your investigations that actually it's the hardworking and the poorer people who are really paying the richest taxes. So, can you explain how that happens?
Well, the principle is yes, the rich don't want to pay taxes, and many of them actually don't, even though they go through the formal process of paying taxes, they get the money back. And I'll explain how that happens. What we've got to understand is that our political system was built by the people who wanted to scam others. They did so by structuring the rules so that the working population actually creates the wealth, and those who were the free riders, as they're known, pocket the net income, the rents of the nation. That was the formula. And so our society, even though we claim it's a liberal democracy and that we uh, all have equality before the law, we're a very unequal society, but nobody talks about it. It's camouflaged by the language and the laws that we have. So, how can rich people make the poor pay for the public services that the rich people use? It's quite simple, actually. The rich people do go through the motions of paying taxes on their high income, but they live in locations that are so valuable because they get the money back from the government that they've paid. Not only do they get their tax revenue back, but they get a bonus on top. And the calculations for that were made by one of my old associates. He's now gone to heaven, a guy called Don Riley, who owned properties in Southwark. And he calculated how, over a period of 40 years, he paid a load of taxes, but he got more back in the revenue that the government allowed him to collect in the form of the location values of his properties. So he was quids in, whereas the working class people who either are rent payers or who live in low value locations end up paying more to the government than they get back. What's absurd, of course, is that it's an unsustainable system. The result is that a lot of low income people now get in benefits more than they are actually earning in wages. So here we have this crazy system where the people who work to create the wealth are not only ripped off through the tax regime to support the poor, sorry, to support the rich folk, but they then force Labour governments mainly to create the benefits to try and offset the suffering that's imposed on them. Like only yesterday, the statistical agency in Britain issued a report, and in the Telegraph, here it is, the Telegraph's headline says, "Enjoy your health. It'll be over by the time you're 61." Meaning that those people in the low wage brackets, in the areas that are short of the resources they need, the infrastructure, uh, are exposed to the kind of pressures that make them ill early in life and then they die early in life. Whereas the taxes they are paying are shifted to the high value locations where the rich folk, who end up not paying anything at all in taxes, enjoy the best public services. This is supposed to be a democracy, and this is the outcome. It's a tragedy that nobody actually talks about, and yet it's all down to segregation. And that's a word. An alternative word is the spatial distribution of people. And if economists ask themselves, how do we segregate? What is it in the economy that dictates the spatial separation of rich from poor, low incomes from high incomes? The mechanism that works on the basis of spatial distribution of income is rent. But there's no discussion in the policy making circles or government or even in the literature on how people's incomes ultimately are affected by the pulling power of those who own the rent generating assets. So ours is a desperately unhappy society, people losing years off their life, and they are subsidizing the rich folk who enjoy long, healthy lives, and they don't pay their taxes because they get it all back in the form of capital gains on their homes.
Mm.
And we call that liberal democracy, and we think that it's a wonderful system.
It's amazing how left-wing politics at the moment makes me very, very angry. You know, we see the people who are promoted in the media as leading the left-wing movement. We've got Mendani in New York, who has just backtracked on his rent controls idea, which was a pledge to get into power, because the people of New York, and my other half's lived in New York. She was a diplomat for the UK. I've got a good story on that. She once got ex-Prince Andrew to hug her. Anyway, different role of the story. But we know the people are suffering, but he cannot fix it with his policies, even though he's promised to. We've got people in the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Your Party, all telling us that they're going to tax people a bit more, but none of them are really talking about the unbelievable problems that you highlight in all your work. How do we fix this left-wing idiocracy that seems to have the policy of left-wing parties?
And that's what I call political paralysis, and it's an existential threat to our civilization. Actually, it's all fraud, it's all deception, and it's all based on refusing to actually come to terms with reality over where real power lies. So, for instance, when people get tired of the old parties lying to them, they just turn to an alternative charismatic person who makes the claims that he will or she will solve the problem. But when you look at what their policies are, they're exactly the same as the policies that have failed for the previous 100 years. So no matter how charismatic, like the Mandami mayor in New York, ultimately they do not have a new policy, let alone the right policy. And so people ultimately distrust government. There is despair. The social system continues to decay. And ultimately, that's what leads to revolutions, great ruptures in the system. So in this country, for instance, we've now got Nigel Farage, who's a acolyte of Donald Trump, who's going to try and repeat Trump's exercise in Britain. But the policies they've announced in the last few days that are supposed to be solving the problems of Britain in the future are no different to what has already been on offered in Britain over the last 80 years since the Second World War. They just wrap them up in a new bunch of words and claim that this time they're going to look after the working people, the hard-working, labouring population, but they don't have any solutions to the underlying mechanism that actually controls the way income is distributed, creating the kind of crises that we have in the housing market. They've got not a clue, and yet they lie, basically. And when I say lie, it's because some of them really do know what is behind all this process, or they have advisors who really know, but they won't discuss the realities. So democracy is really under threat, both in the United States and across Europe, because people are becoming increasingly distrustful of governments. And when that happens, there's always some charismatic idiot like Adolf Hitler waiting in the wings to leap in and mobilize people who are frustrated. So we're in a desperate situation, and all the while, the signs are that, yes, we are rapidly approaching the end of the business cycle. We can see that not just in the housing market, but in the financial state of governments, in the way that enterprises are shedding labor, in the policies that are favoring the rich. All of these elements combine to create the chaos that ultimately must break down.
I've noticed a lot in, Farage says he wants to cut taxes on working people, right? But it never happens. Trump has said that. We've had governments, Tory governments, say they're gonna raise the threshold that you pay taxes, all this stuff, but it never happens. Never. They always backtrack when it comes to cutting taxes, genuine taxes on working people. Thatcher did it as well. She didn't really cut taxes that much on working people. She cut them for the very well off, but many times we get policies that come in and it never happens. It's always the burden. You get more money put onto this government. Starmer, I really disliked Starmer. He came in and what did he do? He put taxes up on national insurance, which hits the working poor even more. A so-called socialist, the Labour Party, why can they not cut taxes on the poor?
There is no alternative under the model of economics that we have. So no matter how intentional they may be, no matter how honest they may feel they are and sincere in wanting to help the poor, they are working within the model, the rules of which do not allow them to do anything different. And until people start looking at the rules of the game and insist on a public conversation that involves politicians, nothing's going to change. And look, it's all very well hitting the politicians all the time, but we also have to acknowledge that members of the public themselves need to come to terms with the reality. You see, one of the problems is that on the one hand, people want lower taxes, fine. But the politician doesn't say to those people, okay, Mr. Home owning taxpayer, you want lower taxes. Which government services do you want us to cut? Because that would put the public on the spot, because they don't want to say, oh, well, we want you to cut transport system or hospital services. No, they want more and better uh, health and education services somehow funded out of lower taxes. And the politicians need to also challenge the public by throwing the ball back in their court by saying, it's no good you asking us for lower taxes unless you agree that we're going to cut public services. Or if you want better public services, you have to tell us how much more you're willing to pay for it. Well, so both the lawmakers and the public are skirting round the realities all the time. And it's only by having an honest conversation and getting to the roots of the problem, the real roots, not what the politicians claim are the roots, that we will start to sort out the problems. But there ain't much time left, because if the economies across the Western world start to crash, as I'm saying they will by the end of this year, um, there's no time to have the kind of informed conversation that would encourage the politicians to start to promise that they will rebase government on policies that will actually work.
How do we fight these two fundamental lies? We've got people on the right, Farage, Trump, are trying to say that you can't raise taxes on the rich because the rich are the ones making all the investments, and they are providing the money for the economic engine, which of course is partly true. Real investment, really brilliant, but rent extraction is hugely damaging. But they just wipe one cloak over that and make rent extraction a disappearing act. And then we've got our friends on the left trying to say we've got to tax everybody and it doesn't matter. We'll raise the taxes and somehow we're going to improve the economy. How do we square that circle? What's the core message you would give, Fred?
Oh boy, that's the issue that we have to confront, and it's got to be done in a language that will appeal to people, or at least stop them in their tracks and force them to come to terms with being willing to confront the realities. And that means that the language needs to be reframed that we're using, because even people like me over the decades, I've used language that now I realize didn't advance the clarity at all. I'm working on that problem. I am clarifying it. Those new ways of presenting the case will appear in my next book, which I'm now told will come out early in April. And I'm hoping that we can begin to get a cathartic conversation going based on new ways of discussing the issues involved. It will be painful because we've got used to the old ways of doing things. We don't like the outcomes, but we're comfortable with the language that we use, especially those of us who are making capital gains on our homes, of course. And it's not until we become honest with ourselves, let alone with other people, that the change will actually happen.
Now, you wrote a book about what we started talking about, the Ricardo's Law, the great tax clawback scam. Was that the title, Fred?
The tax clawback scam,
Yes.
yeah.
And it was a great book, and I read it many years ago, and I not long after I read it, I've got a great story that will explain the utility of that book. I was in a car with a business partner, a multimillionaire, who has a large commercial property empire, and he spent about half an hour telling me a joke about, somebody in a pub and why he has to pay more money because he's wealthy than somebody else and all the taxes he paid. And I quizzed him on this, and I actually found out his total tax he was paying on his income was about 8% of all the various scams he was running, while at the time I was probably paying about 60% of my income in tax, being a PAYE chief executive of a charity. But then I asked him to explore the uplift in value from all his properties, just as you advised in that book, and demonstrated to him that actually he wasn't paying any tax at all. And he got so angry with me because he just didn't want to admit that his whole perception as a rich person was he was a great man because he was paying all of this money in tax. Didn't employ that many people, he just had a vast commercial property empire. So all those people out there, go and buy Fred's books. I'll pop it in the chat in the description, and you can learn all about it.
Exactly. And it is painful because we've been schooled into believing that we've earned the capital gains on the properties that we own. We don't. The whole system is a fraud, but it's not presented as such. It's presented as human rights, equality before the law, liberal democracy, all the fine words that reinforce the present system. But the present system was built on a fraud that goes back not just centuries, but millennia. I'll be explaining the connection with that sequence it all goes back to antiquity, frankly. And it's so embedded in our psyches now that to face up to the truth is really painful. I acknowledge that, but that's where we have the choice. But we need a new kind of way of presenting the case in order to require people to face up to the reality. Otherwise, it won't change, and in which case, the consequences will be chaotic.
It will. Yes. It's not looking great at the moment, getting more and more stories of economic hardship. But all we can do is get people to realize there's a big difference between what you make in your businesses and your employment and what you do in the community to actually make things. But those who take from the community is evil, and they have to start recognizing the damage that they cause by taking away.
Yeah, but of course, the confusion is that most of us fit both categories. We work, we earn our living, but we're sitting on an asset that's milking the community at the same time, which means that we're doing the harm to ourselves without realizing it. And that's the problem, that the experts, the academics, and the think tanks won't spell out the realities. So you can't hardly blame the politicians who are just miming the old dogmas, looking for ways to get the vote so that they can get power. In the meantime, we get further and further away from reality, and the whole system is heading for the big crash.
So, any more predictions on the big crash, Fred?
No, other than to say that we're on track with the kind of things that you were telling me a story about. A guy that's speculating on the tariffs in America and the Trump situation. Can you?
Oh, that was a good one. Yes, this morning one of the sons of one of Donald Trump's cabinet ministers, or whatever they call them in America, he was buying up the sort of speculative asset class where they will sue the government for the amount they've lost due to importing goods with all these changes in the tariff laws, and it's now become an investable. And since the Supreme Court's ruling today, those futures have spiked massively in value. I mean, there's a lot of insider trading going on in politics. We know that. I mean, Peter Mandelson has shown us that. But it just shows you that everything has become a commodity to trade, and it's been done by that information asymmetry that lives in the world. But I would say the greatest information asymmetry is the one of the rentier that you talk about. Until most people who vote, and it doesn't matter which political party you vote for, till you realize that you are being had all the time, your community is being robbed. That is an information asymmetry that robs you of your ability to affect the future of our society.
Exactly. So it's all unreal. So another word for it is corrupt, and but we take it for granted. No, there's no law against it. There are even people now investing in debts that don't yet exist, but which they expect to exist, and so they're speculating on the value of these these assets that don't actually yet exist. But there's a market for it because, well, what else do you do? It's all insane. So until we can shake the system up, it's going to continue to be chaotic, I'm afraid.
Here's a question for you, Fred. Something I speculate on. When somebody makes some money off Bitcoin, or they're playing the stock market, or one of these corrupt politicians finds some little bit of information that allows them to know that this value of this investment goes up, does the money they make actually hurt normal people? Does it hurt society? Or is it a victimless crime?
Well, it's the fabric of society degenerates. So a particular operation may not actually affect people, but because of the nature of it, the corrupt nature of it, or the unreality of it, it just adds to the total unrealness of the social system. And that's what causes the erosion of the vitality of communities, so that when faced with real problems, we don't have the strength to deal with it. We suddenly everything is in debt, and there are no resources, either moral or spiritual or material, to deal with the big problems. And that's the ultimate crime against humanity, that every little bit of behavior that doesn't actually strengthen society weakens it. And the more we weaken the fabric through individual acts, some of which seem pretty harmless, but they're not positive contributions to well-being. They're just dodging around, contributes to the depletion of the system, so that when the crunch comes, we're not able to meet the challenge.
So free riders need to be stopped.
Free riding needs to be stopped, but we need to put it in language that the politicians actually have to convert into law. See, words like wealth, a wealth tax. In the end, every politician wants a wealth tax, knowing full well that when it comes to drafting the legislation, they can't put their finger on exactly how to tax wealth. And so the people who are wealthy walk away laughing, whereas they know exactly how to tax earned incomes, wages, and the employment of people. Like, as you say, the national insurance in Britain is a tax on employing people, with the result is that many young people coming out of university can't get jobs now. They're looking forward to a life on benefits. That's the erosion of the fabric of our society.
So this wealth tax thing, I remember when we went up to and give that speech at the Green Party conference all those years ago, and yet the Greens are still coming out, even though it's buried in their policies, to have a proper tax on economic rent. Still today, all they can do on the TV is call, say, wealth tax, and it's never going to happen. It's amazing how annoying that is. That even the Green Party, where are their economists? Where are their advisors? And why is their leader coming out with such nonsense?
Because they've been educated into the nonsense paradigm. And that's what we've got to explode. And hopefully we will end up doing that pretty soon now.
Right. I shall start lobbying at our Green leaders again and get them to start following your advice, Fred. Once you give us the right language to do that.
Okay. Well, it's a mission that I hope to complete before I depart to see the gods.
Well, we're waiting in bated breath for your new book. I certainly am, because I wish I knew the answers. So in the comments, in the chat, please tell us how we get that society created, beautiful, complicated, synergistic income that surrounds us out of the private, wasteful hands and back to serving the community it should. I want to hear everybody's ideas in the chat. And thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Peter. See you next week.
Take care.